And what's interesting is, okay, we see once they do eat from the fruit, that it actually doesn't kill their physical bodies. And so the serpent is not actually lying, but he's saying something that's in a way true, but in a way false. And because what we see later on is that something in them did actually die, and even their physical bodies began aging to the point of death, or to the end of being death. And this seems to be not their original design. Okay, so what we have then is, why did Eve eat from the fruit? And we'll ask, maybe was she obligated to do so? And according to my research, we would say that before the fall, human nature was very good, and there wasn't an evil kind of change in their nature yet. The thing is, what happens is Adam was capable of making good decisions and bad decisions. And what's interesting here is, once the fall happened, the physical nature of man changed. And now, because he has a sinful nature, his desires are kind of, we would say, perverted and changed to always like to go towards sinful and bad things. So here there is an interesting thing. Does being very good mean that it's impossible for you to do anything bad? And no, I don't think that's what Genesis is saying, because it's not saying that Adam was as perfect as God is. What it says is that Adam is made in God's image, which means that there's resembling something in Adam that resembles God, and not that God looks like Adam, but that there's something in Adam that comes, that is in him, that is an image of who God is. Okay, and so that's also a different discussion on, does it mean that it's maybe the soul, or that our souls are eternal, or is it that we have a moral knowledge? Okay, so, but we can have that discussion at some point if you're interested, but for now, let's just look here. It says, yeah, once they did actually eat from the fruit, what's interesting, the serpent says, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So what we see there is, knowing good and evil. What that could possibly mean is, I don't exactly know what that means, but I think what a possible way to understand that is to say that before eating of the fruit, so God was making, actively experiencing moral decisions, whereas Adam and Eve were not really part of making moral decisions. Okay, you might say, well, if they were created in God's image, and God is making moral decisions, but that also is assuming that being made in God's image is a very full image, very, very exact likeness. But that also doesn't necessarily mean that, because we see that there was an innocence in Adam and Eve that we see once they eat from the fruit, they suddenly realize that they are standing there naked. And so they try to cover themselves. And there's kind of a shame that they have that they are trying to conceal. But they didn't really. This is also an interesting thing because even though they knew that it's good to live and it's good to follow what God tells them, okay, because they were doing that for a time before they chose to eat from the fruit. It's interesting that at that point they weren't ashamed of their nakedness, and so it appears to me that the best way to understand that is that their interaction with good and evil changed after the fall. I don't know anything further. I don't know how you would answer it better, but just because we can't answer it doesn't mean that there isn't a very good answer. It just means that we don't know it yet. The next thing is that, well, the question is, why is it fair that there's suffering right now in the whole world, and even with natural events that cause suffering, just because some guy did something that God didn't like? And okay, firstly, I'd like to also point out that Eve, later on we read that Eve was actually deceived, and Adam was the one who sinned. So even though Eve was the first one to eat from the fruit, it was actually not necessarily a sin of Eve, but when Adam ate from the fruit, it does call it a sin. And so that's also an interesting idea that even though Eve, okay, we would say that morality is dependent on God, because God decided what was wrong and what was right. And so essentially what's wrong and right has always been so since God instituted it. Okay, but okay, that's also brings in interesting questions like, well, is something wrong before God informs us that it's wrong? And I would say, yeah, there needs to be, in a way, yes, and in a way, no, because there needs to be, to break a law, you first need to establish a law, and just because, God knows what's right and wrong doesn't necessarily mean that we know